During an argument, my husband yelled, "I'm not sleeping with you anymore. You disgust me. I can't even stand looking at you these days. Deal with it." I just nodded and actually dealt with it in a way he never saw coming. There's a moment in every dying marriage where you realize you've become invisible. For me, it happened on a random Tuesday when I spent 3 hours making Joseph's favorite meal from scratch, set the table with actual candles and cloth napkins, changed out of my work clothes into a dress and waited. He came home at 8:30. Looked at the table. Looked at me. And his face did something I'd never seen before. It twisted with genuine disgust. "What's this?" Not thank you. Not appreciation for the effort. Just confusion mixed with revulsion. That's when he said it. The thing that ended everything. "I'm not sleeping with you anymore. You disgust me. I can't even stand looking at you these days. Deal with it." 7 years of marriage. 3 years of happiness. 4 years of slow decay. All of it ending with those words. I'm Amanda and I'm about to tell you how I dealt with it. But you need to know who we were first. Because the gap between who we were and who we became, that's where the real story lives. That's where everything fell apart. And that's where I learned exactly what I was capable of when pushed far enough. I'm 34, a graphic designer who works from our cramped 2-bedroom apartment in the city. Joseph is 36, an account manager at some mid-sized firm downtown. The kind of place where everyone wears business casual and pretends the coffee in the break room is drinkable. He's good at his job, schmoozing clients, closing deals, making spreadsheets look impressive during presentations. When we started, we were different people. Better people maybe. Or maybe just people who hadn't learned how to hurt each other yet. The first 3 years were the kind of good that makes you believe you've figured out something most people miss. We had Sunday brunches at Mel's Diner on the corner. This tiny place with cracked vinyl booths and a waitress named Donna who knew our order by heart. We'd sit there for hours splitting a stack of pancakes, him taking the top 2, me taking the bottom 2, arguing over crossword clues while our coffee got cold. 7 letters, starts with B, means abundance, I'd say, pen hovering over the squares. Bountiful, he'd answer without looking up from his phone. That's 9 letters, genius. Then the clue's wrong. Or you're bad at counting. We were insufferable. The kind of couple other people probably hated. But we were happy in a way that felt effortless, like we'd stumbled into something most people spend their whole lives searching for. We took spontaneous road trips to nowhere. Just packed a bag Friday afternoon and drove until we felt like stopping. Terrible playlists blasting through his old sedan speakers. Songs we pretended to hate but secretly loved. He'd sing off-key to 80s rock ballads. I'd do dramatic renditions of pop songs while he laughed so hard he had to pull over. We had inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else. He'd leave post-it notes on my desk, stick figure drawings of us fighting dragons or riding dinosaurs or doing something equally ridiculous, just because he knew it would make me smile in the middle of a frustrating project when a client was being impossible about color schemes or font choices. There was this rhythm between us, this unspoken language. I'd know when he needed space versus when he needed to talk. He'd know when I was stressed before I said a word. Would order takeout from my favorite Thai place and queue up a movie we'd seen 100 times because he understood that sometimes comfort matters more than novelty. We weren't perfect. Nobody is. We'd argue about stupid things. Whose turn it was to do dishes, whether we could afford the nicer apartment, why he never remembered to buy milk even though I'd text him 3 times. But the arguments felt manageable. Like the kind of friction that happens when 2 people are learning to share space and life and everything in between. I remember our 3rd anniversary. He'd found this Italian restaurant tucked away on a side street. The kind of place with checkered tablecloths and wine bottles covered in years of candle wax. We sat at a tiny table near the back, close enough that our knees touched underneath. The waiter made some joke about how the carbonara was so good it should be illegal, and Joseph laughed. This real, genuine laugh that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. I watched him across that table and thought, I've figured it out. I've cracked the code on how to make a marriage work. That thought haunts me now. The arrogance of it. The naive certainty that love was enough, that good intentions could carry us through anything. Because somewhere between year 3 and year 4 things started shifting. Small changes at first. The kind you can convince yourself are normal adjustments. The natural settling that happens when the honeymoon phase ends and real life takes over. Joseph stopped touching me casually. No more hand on the small of my back when he'd pass behind me in the kitchen. No more pulling me close on the couch during movies. No more absent-minded touches. Fingers brushing my arm during conversation, hand finding mine while we walked down the street. The physical distance felt small at first. Negligible. I told myself we were just getting comfortable, that not every moment needed to be filled with affection. That's what long-term relationships look like, right? Comfortable. Easy. Less urgent than those early days when you can't keep your hands off each other. Then he stopped asking about my day. I'd tell him about landing a new client or dealing with someone who kept changing their mind about every design element, and he'd nod with his eyes on his phone. Home. That's great, babe. But he wasn't listening. I could see it in how his thumbs kept scrolling, how his expression never changed, how he never asked follow-up questions. He stopped sharing stories from work too. We used to decompress together. Him venting about impossible clients or office politics, me offering perspective or just being a sounding board. That stopped. When I'd ask how his day went, he'd say, fine, or same old stuff, and the conversation would die right there. The silences between us grew longer. Heavier. We'd sit in the same room and it felt like we were miles apart. By year 5 he was staying late at the office 3, 4, sometimes 5 nights a week. Coming home around 9 instead of 6. I'd make dinner, plate his portion, leave it in the microwave. When he'd finally walk through the door, he'd heat it up and eat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, barely tasting what I'd spent an hour preparing. I made excuses. Told myself he was working toward a promotion. That this was temporary. That all marriages go through phases where work takes priority and you just have to weather it. The articles I read online all said the same thing. Long-term relationships require patience, understanding, writing out the difficult periods. So I waited. I was patient. I understood. And things got worse. By year 6 we weren't a couple anymore. We were 2 people who shared an address and a lease and nothing else that mattered. Joseph converted our second bedroom into his office. Moved in a desk, a filing cabinet, a small TV. Said he needed dedicated workspace since he was taking on extra projects. Made sense at the time. I even helped him set it up, arranged his desk so it faced the window, bought him a lamp with good lighting for those late-night work sessions. What I didn't realize was that the office was becoming his bedroom. It happened gradually. First, it was just occasional nights when he'd fall asleep at his desk and not bother moving to our bedroom. Then it was nights when he'd claim he had early morning calls and didn't want to wake me. Then nights when he said he needed to finish work late and didn't want to disturb me when he finally came to bed. Eventually there were no more excuses. He just slept there. Every night. The door between us closed and locked. We hadn't shared a bed in 4 months by the time I made that lasagna. 4 months of lying awake in a bedroom that felt too big and too empty, listening to him shower and settle into his separate space, wondering when we'd stopped being married and started being strangers who happened to live together. He'd walk past me in the living room while I worked on design projects, close enough that I could smell his cologne, and it was like I didn't exist. No hello. No acknowledgement. Just footsteps and then the sound of his door closing. I kept working. Kept taking on new clients. Kept building websites and designing logos and creating brand identities for other people while my own identity as someone's wife crumbled into nothing. And I tried to fix it. God, I tried everything. I planned that weekend getaway to the mountains. Spent hours researching hiking trails he'd mentioned wanting to try. Found a cabin with a fireplace and a view. Located a craft brewery nearby that specialized in the IPAs he loved. Made all the reservations. Cleared my schedule. Got excited about 2 days of just us with no distractions, no work, no excuses. He canceled 2 days before. Major client presentation. Couldn't be avoided. I understood. Rescheduled for a month later. He canceled again. Different excuse. Weekend strategy session his boss needed him for. By then I'd paid the non-refundable deposit twice. I stopped trying to reschedule. Stopped mentioning it. Let it die quietly like everything else between us. I started cooking his favorite meals with desperate energy. His mom's lasagna recipe. His grandmother's pot roast. The chocolate cake that took 3 hours and required every bowl we owned. He'd eat them without comment. Sometimes without even looking up from whatever he was reading on his phone. One Tuesday, 2 months before everything imploded, I tried something different. Bought expensive lingerie from that boutique downtown I'd always been too self-conscious to shop at. Black lace that made me feel vulnerable and hopeful in equal measure. Lit candles. Put on our old playlist from when we were dating. Waited in the bedroom. He walked past, glanced in, and his expression didn't change. I'm tired, Amanda. Not tonight. Not tonight became not this week. Not this month. Not ever. I suggested starting a new show together. Something we could watch on weekends like we used to. Make it an event again. Oh, I already started that, he said, scrolling through his phone. I'm like 6 episodes in. We could start over together, I offered, hating how small my voice sounded. Nah. Don't want to go backwards. He'd rather watch alone than share something with me. That should have been my wake-up call. Should have been the moment I realized I was fighting for something that was already dead. But I kept trying. Kept hoping. Kept believing that if I just loved him hard enough, tried hard enough, was enough, he'd come back to me. Which brings us back to that Tuesday. To the lasagna. To the candles and the dress and the 3 hours of effort he looked at with disgust. To the moment he finally said what he'd clearly been thinking for months. That I wasn't worth his time, his attention, or his basic decency anymore. That I disgusted him. I stood there holding that plate and something inside me shifted. Not broke. Breaking implies there was something sudden, something violent. This was quieter. Like a door closing. Like finally accepting something I'd been avoiding for too long. I set the plate down. Looked at him. And nodded. Hey, I said. I'll deal with it. He looked surprised. I think he expected tears. Expected me to beg him to explain or to take it back or to tell me what I could do differently. Instead, I walked past him, went to our bedroom, my bedroom, and closed the door. And started planning exactly how I was going to deal with it. I didn't sleep that night. Just lay there in the dark staring at the ceiling, Joseph's words playing on repeat in my head. You disgust me. I can't even stand looking at you these days. Around 3 in the morning, I heard him moving around in his room. The bathroom door opened and closed. Water running. Then silence again. We were 10 feet apart with a wall between us, and it might as well have been miles. I got up around 6, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with my laptop pretending to work on a client project. My hands moved across the keyboard, but I wasn't really seeing the screen. Just going through motions because sitting still felt impossible. That's when I started thinking about when things had actually changed. Not the gradual drift of years 4 and 5. The sharp turn. The moment Joseph stopped being distant and started being someone else entirely. The name had appeared casually at first, maybe 8 months ago. Vanessa needs help with the Henderson account. Just another coworker. Another name in the roster of people he worked with that I'd never met and barely paid attention to. But then it was everywhere. Vanessa and I are grabbing dinner to discuss strategy. Vanessa thinks we should restructure the client approach. Vanessa suggested this great restaurant downtown I'd never heard of. Vanessa. Her name started replacing mine in his daily narrative. When he'd come home, back when he still occasionally talked to me, his stories were full of her. What she'd said in the meeting. How she'd handled a difficult client. Her ideas for the quarterly presentation. At first I told myself this was normal. Work friendships happen. People have colleagues they click with professionally. Then he started taking phone calls with her in the living room instead of his office. On speakerphone. I'd be working on my laptop and hear her voice. Young, bright, with this laugh that seemed to bubble up naturally. The kind of laugh that made other people want to laugh too. She was 28. I knew this because Joseph had mentioned it once, explaining why she had such fresh perspectives on their accounts. She's 28, sees things differently than the old guard at the office. I was 34. 6 years older. Apparently part of some old guard in his mind. I looked her up on social media one afternoon. Found her easily, Vanessa Hart, account coordinator at Joseph's firm. Blonde hair and beachy waves. White teeth in every photo. Pictures of her at rooftop bars, at spinning classes, at brunch with friends who all looked like they'd walked out of a lifestyle magazine. She was beautiful in that effortless way some women are. The kind where they can throw on jeans and a t-shirt and still look put together. Still look like they belong in the world while I felt like I was just taking up space in it. I wasn't jealous at first. And isn't that pathetic? I wasn't jealous that my husband was spending all his time with a beautiful younger woman. I was relieved. Relieved someone was making him smile again. Grateful another woman was doing the emotional labor I couldn't seem to get right anymore. I'd become so small in my own marriage that I was thankful someone else could make my husband happy. That should have been my first clue that something was seriously wrong. Not with him. With me. With how much of myself I'd given away trying to hold on to something that was already slipping through my fingers. The changes in Joseph started around the same time Vanessa's name became a constant presence. 6 months before that Tuesday night in the kitchen, he started becoming someone I didn't recognize. New clothes appeared in his closet. Designer button-downs in colors he'd never worn before. Deep burgundy, forest green, crisp white that probably required dry cleaning. Expensive jeans that actually fit instead of the baggy ones he'd been wearing for years. A leather jacket that must have cost at least $300. When I asked about it, he said he'd gotten a bonus and wanted to update his wardrobe. Dressing for the job you want, not the job you have, he said like he was quoting some motivational poster. He bought new cologne. Not the drugstore aftershave he'd used since I'd known him, but something expensive from a department store counter. It smelled like cedar and something else I couldn't place. Sophisticated. Nothing like the Joseph I'd married. He started getting haircuts every 2 weeks instead of letting it grow out for months like he used to. Started spending 20 minutes in the bathroom before work instead of his usual 5-minute routine. I'd hear him in there, the water running, drawers opening and closing. When he'd finally emerge, his hair would be perfectly styled, his face clean-shaven, his shirt tucked in just right. He was preparing for something. Or someone. Just not me. The gym membership was what really confirmed it. Joseph had always been naturally thin, never cared much about fitness. I'd suggested joining a gym together a few years back, thinking it could be something we did as a couple. He'd said it was a waste of money, that he got enough exercise walking around the city. Suddenly, he had a membership to one of those expensive places downtown. Started going before work. Coming home with protein shakes in the fridge and meal prep containers I'd never seen him use before. His body changed. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. His shoulders looked broader. His stomach flatter. He started wearing his shirts differently, like he was proud of how he looked instead of just covering himself. He was dressing for someone. Grooming for someone. Becoming someone new. Just not for me. I'd watch him leave the apartment each morning looking like a man going on a date. Cologne applied, hair perfect, clothes that fit like they'd been tailored. And I'd sit there in my sweatpants and old t-shirt wondering when I'd become invisible. When had I stopped being someone worth dressing up for? His schedule became completely unpredictable around the same time. He'd always worked late occasionally, but this was different. He wasn't coming home at 9 anymore. It was 11. Midnight. Sometimes 1 in the morning. I'd be in bed pretending to sleep, listening for his key in the lock. Hearing him come in quietly like he was trying not to wake me. Then immediately heading to the bathroom. Always the shower. Always washing away the day, or washing away evidence of something I didn't want to name. One Thursday night he didn't come home until almost 1:30. I'd been lying there for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind creating scenarios I didn't want to believe but couldn't stop imagining. When I finally heard him in the hallway, I got up. Met him in the kitchen. He looked startled to see me standing there. "Where were you?" I asked, keeping my voice level. He didn't even look guilty. That's what struck me most. No embarrassment. No sheepishness. Just mild annoyance that I was asking. Work emergency. Had to finish the presentation for the morning meeting. Until 1:30 in the morning? It's a big account. You know how it is. He moved past me to get water from the fridge. That's when I smelled it. Perfume. Not mine. Not any scent I owned. Something floral and expensive. "You smell like perfume," I said. He took a long drink of water. Probably from someone at the office. Conference room gets stuffy. People wear strong perfumes. At 1:30 in the morning? We ordered dinner in. Vanessa wore the stuff that gave me a headache, honestly. Couldn't wait to get out of there. Vanessa. Of course it was Vanessa. Reasonable explanation. Conference rooms do get stuffy. People do wear strong perfumes. Late night work sessions do happen when big accounts are on the line. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly that I let myself ignore the way he wouldn't meet my eyes. Let myself ignore that he'd showered the second he got home. Let myself ignore every instinct screaming that something was wrong. "Hey," I said. "I'm going back to bed." I walked past him, climbed back into my bed, and listened to him shower for the second time that night. The next morning I called Rebecca. Waited until Joseph left for work, then dialed my sister's number with shaking hands. She answered on the third ring. "Hey, what's up? Are you busy?" Something in my voice made her pause. No. Talk to me. So I did. Told her everything. The distance that had been growing for years. The late nights. Vanessa's name constantly in his mouth. The way he'd transformed himself. The perfume on his clothes at 1 in the morning with an explanation that was technically reasonable but felt wrong. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end. Amanda, Rebecca said finally, her voice careful. He's either already cheating or about to. You don't know that. There could be. Stop. He cut me off. Stop making excuses for him. Stop finding reasonable explanations for unreasonable behavior. You're not jumping to conclusions. You're finally landing where the evidence has been pointing for months. I sat on the couch, phone pressed to my ear, feeling something crack open in my chest. What am I supposed to do? My voice came out small. Broken. What do you want to do? I didn't know how to answer that. Part of me still wanted to save the marriage. Still believed if I just tried harder, loved better, looked prettier, cooked better meals, dressed up more, lost weight, became more interesting. If I just became whoever Joseph wanted me to be, he'd come back to me. The other part, the part one was afraid to acknowledge, knew Rebecca was right. I don't know, I admitted. Then start paying attention, Rebecca said. Stop ignoring what's right in front of you. And when you're ready to face it, call me. I'll help you. We said goodbye. I sat there on the couch with my phone in my lap, staring at the wall where Joseph and I had hung our wedding photos 3 years ago. We looked so young in those pictures. So happy. So completely unaware of how things would turn out. I thought about Vanessa. 28. Blonde. Beautiful. Everything I wasn't anymore. And I thought about Joseph coming home at 1:30 in the morning smelling like her perfume with explanations that were just plausible enough to hide behind. Rebecca's words echoed in my head. Stop ignoring what's right in front of you. I'd been ignoring it for months. Maybe longer. Making excuses. Finding reasonable explanations. Convincing myself that my husband wasn't capable of betraying me like that. But the truth was sitting there in plain sight, and I'd been choosing not to see it because seeing it meant facing it. Meant accepting that my marriage wasn't just dying. It might already be dead. And that whatever came next was going to hurt worse than anything I'd felt so far. I spent the rest of that weekend in a fog. Joseph stayed in his room most of Saturday and Sunday, only emerging for food or to leave the apartment entirely. We didn't speak. Didn't acknowledge each other. The silence had weight to it now, heavy and suffocating. Monday came and went. Then Tuesday morning arrived and I woke up with a strange kind of clarity. Maybe it was exhaustion. I hadn't been sleeping well for weeks. Maybe it was desperation. But I decided to try one more time. One last attempt to reach him before I accepted what Rebecca had been telling me. I spent the afternoon making lasagna from scratch. His absolute favorite. The recipe his mother had given me during our first year of marriage. Handwritten on an index card that was now stained and worn from use. I'd made it dozens of times over the years. For his birthday, for celebrations, for random Tuesdays when I just wanted to make him happy. I set the table with actual placemats and cloth napkins, not the paper towels we'd been using for months. Found the candles we'd gotten as a wedding gift and never used. Lit them even though it felt ridiculous, even though part of me knew this was pointless. I changed out of my sweatpants into a dress. Not anything fancy, just a simple navy dress I used to wear on date nights back when we had date nights. Put on makeup for the first time in weeks. Mascara. Lipstick. Tried to look like the woman he'd married instead of the ghost I'd become. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked good, I didn't really. I looked like someone trying too hard. Someone desperate. But I was past caring about pride. Joseph came home around 8. I heard his key in the lock, heard him walk down the hallway. I was standing in the kitchen when he appeared in the doorway. He stopped. Looked at the table I'd set with its candles and placemats. Looked at me standing there in a dress and makeup. And something shifted in his expression. Not warmth. Not appreciation. Not even surprise. Something ugly. His face twisted with what I can only describe as contempt. Like the sight of my effort physically repulsed him. What's this? He asked. Not, this looks nice, or what's the occasion, or even a neutral what's going on. Just, what's this, with a tone that made my stomach drop. Dinner, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I made your favorite. Your mom's lasagna. He laughed. It was bitter and sharp like a slap across the face. You think lasagna is going to fix this? I didn't understand. Fix what? Joseph, I'm just trying to. Trying to what? Guilt me into pretending everything's fine. I felt something crack inside my chest. I'm not trying to guilt you. I'm trying to have dinner with my husband. I'm trying to. Trying to what? He stepped further into the kitchen. Save us? There's nothing to save, Amanda. What are you talking about? What did I do wrong? His jaw tightened. What did you do wrong? Are you serious right now? Yes. I'm serious. You won't talk to me. You barely look at me. I don't know what happened or how to fix it if you won't tell me what's wrong. What's wrong? He set his briefcase down with more force than necessary. Fine. You want to know what's wrong? Yes. You've given me nothing to stay for. The words hung in the air between us. I stood there trying to process what he'd just said, trying to understand what he meant. I don't understand, I said quietly. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and the disgust in his eyes was unmistakable. You've let yourself go, Amanda. You don't even try anymore. I physically stepped back like he'd shoved me. What? Look at you. He gestured at me standing there in my dress and makeup, the outfit I'd spent an hour choosing, the effort I'd put into my appearance for the first time in months. You're in sweatpants and messy hair 90% of the time. No makeup. No effort. You stopped caring about how you look, about us, about me. Each word landed like a physical blow. I looked down at myself, at the dress I was literally wearing right now, and felt completely disoriented. I'm wearing a dress right now, I said, voice shaking. I put on makeup. Yeah, and it's sad. It's sad that you have to try this hard to look halfway decent. You used to be beautiful, Amanda. You used to care. The man standing in front of me wasn't my husband. Couldn't be. My husband had promised to love me in sickness and health, through better and worse. This man was critiquing my appearance like I was an employee up for review, like my worth was determined by how well I performed the role of attractive wife. I work from home, I said, trying to keep my voice level even though I felt like I was breaking apart. I don't need to dress up to sit at my computer all day. You never complained before. Maybe I was being too polite. Too polite. My voice rose. You were being a decent human being. You were being my husband. Well, maybe I'm tired of being polite. Maybe I'm tired of pretending I don't notice that you've completely given up. Given up? I just spent 3 hours making your favorite meal from scratch. I set the table. I got dressed up. I'm trying. You're always trying, he cut me off. That's the problem. You're trying so hard to fix something that's been broken for years instead of just accepting that it's over. It's over. My voice came out as a whisper. You're saying our marriage is over? He ran a hand through his hair, looking away. I'm saying I can't do this anymore. Can't do what? Be married to me. I can't pretend I'm happy when I'm not. I can't pretend I'm attracted to you when I'm not. I can't. He stopped himself. Can't what? I demanded. Finish the sentence, Joseph. He looked at me then and his eyes were cold. Like he was looking at a stranger he didn't particularly like. I'm not sleeping with you anymore, he said, voice dropping to something clinical and detached. You disgust me. I can't even stand looking at you these days. Deal with it. The kitchen went silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the slight flicker of the candles on the table. I stood there processing what he'd just said, that I disgusted him, that he couldn't stand looking at me, that 7 years of marriage, 7 years of building a life together meant nothing against his contempt for who I'd become. I waited for him to take it back. To say he was just angry, that he didn't mean it, that those words had come out wrong. He didn't. He just stood there watching me, waiting for something. Tears probably. Begging. Some kind of breakdown that would give him ammunition to paint me as the unstable wife who couldn't handle the truth. I didn't give him the satisfaction. Something in me went quiet. Not numb. I could still feel everything, the pain and humiliation and shock. But underneath all that was something else. Something cold and clear and surprisingly calm. I nodded slowly. Hey, I said. He blinked, caught off guard. Okay. Yeah. I'll deal with it. He waited for more. For tears. For arguments. For me to fall apart the way he clearly expected. I gave him nothing. We stood there in that kitchen with the lasagna cooling on the stove and the candles burning pointlessly on the table, looking at each other across a distance that had nothing to do with physical space. After a long moment, he grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair where he'd tossed it. "I'm going out," he said. "Of course you are." He paused at the doorway, half-turned like he was going to say something else. Then he just left. I heard his footsteps down the hallway. The front door opening and closing. His car starting in the parking lot. The sound of him driving away. I stood there alone in the kitchen looking at the dinner I'd spent hours preparing. The table I'd set. The effort I'd made that he'd looked at with disgust. Then I walked to the table, blew out the candles, and sat down in the chair where Joseph should have been sitting. I pulled out my phone and called Rebecca. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, what's?" "He said I disgust him," I interrupted. My voice sounded strange. Too calm. Like I was reporting something that had happened to someone else. "He said he can't stand looking at me. He told me to deal with it." Silence on the other end. "Then, where is he now?" "Gone. He left." "I'm coming over." "You don't have to. I'm already grabbing my keys. Be there in 20 minutes. She hung up before I could protest. I sat there in the silence of the apartment, looking at the cold lasagna, the unused plates, the napkins that would never wipe anyone's mouth. And I made a decision. If Joseph wanted me to deal with it, I would deal with it. I'd protect myself. Document everything. Find out the truth about him and Vanessa. And I'd make sure he regretted every single word he'd just said to me. Rebecca showed up 18 minutes later with 2 large coffees and a look of grim determination. "Tell me everything," she said, setting the coffee in front of me. So I did. Every word he'd said. Every ounce of cruelty. The way he'd looked at me like I was something he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. When I finished, Rebecca didn't tell me it would be okay. Didn't say he didn't mean it or that all marriages go through rough patches. Instead, she asked, "What are you going to do?" I took a sip of coffee. It was still too hot, burned my tongue, but I didn't care. "I'm going to protect myself," I said. "And I'm going to make sure he regrets every word he just said." Rebecca reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "Patricia Stone," she said, sliding it across the table. "She was my divorce attorney. She's expensive, but she's ruthless. And she wins." I picked up the card, looked at the embossed name and phone number. "Call her tomorrow," Rebecca said. "Tell her everything. And whatever you do, don't let Joseph know you're planning anything." "Not yet." I nodded, tucking the card into my pocket. We sat there in my kitchen drinking coffee that was too hot, not saying much, just existing in the wreckage of what my marriage had become. And I started planning exactly how I was going to deal with it. Rebecca stayed until almost midnight. We sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee that had long gone cold, planning my next moves like we were strategizing a military operation instead of the end of my marriage. "First thing tomorrow, call Patricia," she said for the 3rd time. "Don't wait. Don't second-guess yourself. Just call her." "I will. And don't tell Joseph anything. Not that you're talking to a lawyer, not that you're planning anything. Act normal." I almost laughed at that. Normal. Right. Like I know what that is anymore. After Rebecca left, I sat alone in the apartment listening to the silence. Joseph still wasn't home. It was past midnight on a Wednesday. No work emergency lasts until midnight on a Wednesday. I got up and walked to the filing cabinet in the corner of the living room. We kept all our important documents there. Birth certificates, social security cards, insurance papers. And our prenup. I pulled out the thick manila envelope, the one I hadn't touched since we'd filed it away 7 years ago after the wedding. Joseph's parents had insisted on it. His mother specifically, saying it was just standard protection for both parties, that everyone does it now, that it didn't mean we didn't trust each other. I'd signed it without reading it carefully. We were in love. We were getting married. The prenup felt like a formality, something his parents needed for peace of mind, but that would never actually matter. I spread the document across the kitchen table and started reading. Really reading, not just skimming like I had back then. Most of it was standard. Division of assets acquired before marriage, protection of individual inheritances, specification of separate bank accounts. But then I found it, on page 7, in language that was surprisingly clear for a legal document. An infidelity clause. If either party could prove the other had been unfaithful during the marriage, the unfaithful party would forfeit all rights to joint assets. They'd walk away with only what was individually theirs before the marriage. No split of joint accounts. No alimony. Nothing. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. Then I took a photo with my phone and texted it to Rebecca even though it was almost 1 in the morning. She responded within 30 seconds. This is gold. Now you just need proof. I sat there in the quiet apartment, document in my hands, and felt something shift. Joseph's parents had wanted to protect their son from some hypothetical gold digger. Instead, they'd accidentally given me the weapon I needed to protect myself from him. The irony wasn't lost on me. Neither was the opportunity. I called Patricia Stone the next morning at 9 sharp. Her assistant put me through after a brief hold. This is Patricia. Her voice was professional, efficient. My name is Amanda Parker. My sister Rebecca used you for her divorce. She gave me your number. Rebecca Hartley's sister. Yes. What can I do for you? I told her everything. The distance. The contempt. The suspicions about Vanessa. The cruel words 2 nights ago. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. Do you have a prenup? She asked when I finished. Yes. With an infidelity clause. Good. Get me a copy. And start documenting everything. Late nights, unusual expenses, any evidence of infidelity. Emails, texts, location data if you can get it. The more evidence you have, the stronger your case. How do I get that kind of evidence without breaking the law? Joint accounts, shared devices, anything that's technically in both your names. That's fair game. Don't hack into his personal phone or email. But if he's careless about leaving things unlocked, that's his problem, not yours. We talked for another 20 minutes about strategy, timelines, costs. She was expensive, $400 an hour with a $10,000 retainer. But Rebecca had been right. Patricia was worth it. After we hung up, I opened our credit card statements online. The joint account that I'd never paid much attention to because Joseph always handled the bills. I started going through the charges methodically, month by month, looking for patterns. And I found them. Dinner at Marco's, an upscale Italian place downtown. $187. I'd never been there. When I checked the date, it was a Thursday night when Joseph had texted me saying he'd be working late. Hotel charge. The Whitmore, a boutique hotel in the business district. $295 for 1 night. The date was 3 weeks ago, the same night he'd claimed he had an early morning client meeting across town, and it made more sense to stay closer. Another restaurant. Another hotel. Flowers from an expensive florist. $120. I'd never received flowers. Then I found the one that made my stomach turn. Tiffany's. $847. Dated 2 weeks ago. I'd never received anything from Tiffany's. I took screenshots of everything. Organized them by date in a folder on my laptop. Named it, Tax Documents 2023, because Joseph would never think to open something that boring. Each charge told a story. Each receipt was proof. Each lie was documented evidence that would support the infidelity clause. I wasn't angry anymore. Or maybe I was, but it was a cold anger now. Controlled. Methodical. Anger is messy. Evidence is clean. That's when I noticed the tablet. Our shared tablet that Joseph used for work emails. He'd left it on the kitchen counter that morning, and when I picked it up to move it, I realized he hadn't locked it. I stood there holding it, thinking about what Patricia had said. Shared devices are fair game. I opened the browser and searched for tracking apps. Found one that had good reviews, claimed to be undetectable, and could mirror texts and location data to another device. It took less than 5 minutes to install and sync to my phone. I felt guilty doing it. Like I was violating his privacy, crossing some line I couldn't uncross. But then I thought about the hotels and the jewelry and Vanessa's laugh coming through his speakerphone while I sat invisible in the next room. He'd crossed the line first. I set the tablet back where he'd left it and went back to work on a logo design for a client. Tried to focus on color schemes and font choices while my phone sat next to me, syncing data from Joseph's messages. Within 24 hours I had everything I needed. Text to Vanessa sent at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Can't wait for this weekend. Just you and me, no interruptions. Another at 11:23 p.m. on a Wednesday. She has no idea. And honestly, I don't care if she finds out anymore. I'm done pretending. And the one that hurt the most sent at 4:15 p.m. on a Thursday. You're everything she's not, beautiful, exciting, alive. I should have left her months ago. Just waiting for the right time. The location data showed exactly what I'd suspected. Joseph had been at an address in the Pearl District. Vanessa's apartment, I confirmed with a quick search. 3 nights a week for the past 2 months. Always the nights he claimed he was working late. I sat on our couch reading messages where my husband described me as a burden. As someone he was stuck with. As the obstacle between him and his happiness with someone younger, prettier, more exciting. Each message was like a small cut. Individually they stung. Together they were devastating. But I didn't cry. Didn't break down. Just saved everything, backed it up to 3 different cloud services, and added it to my evidence folder. The next step was protecting myself financially. I went to a different bank across town, one Joseph would never randomly walk into, and opened a new account. Just in my name. Told the banker I was planning some surprise expenses and wanted to keep them separate. Then I started transferring money from our joint savings. Small amounts, $300 here, $500 there. Nothing large enough to trigger alerts or raise immediate suspicions. Just enough to build a cushion for whatever came next. Within 2 weeks, I had $15,000 secured in an account Joseph didn't know existed. I also started changing passwords. Every subscription service I paid for that Joseph used. Netflix, Hulu, Spotify, the meal kit delivery service, his gym membership that I'd been covering for months. Changed them all. Joseph noticed immediately. My phone started buzzing with texts while I was working on a client presentation. Why can't I log into Netflix? Did you change the Hulu password? What the hell, Amanda? I finished the paragraph I was writing, saved my work, then sent one message back. You said to deal with it. I'm dealing with it. He came home early that day. Stormed through the door around 5:30, face red. What's your problem? He demanded, finding me in the living room with my laptop. I didn't look up. I don't have a problem. You changed all the passwords. That's childish. He said I disgust you. I figured you wouldn't want to share streaming services with someone so disgusting. His jaw tightened. I could see him calculating whether to escalate or retreat. See him trying to figure out if I was just being petty or if this meant something more. I didn't give him time to decide. I looked up from my laptop and met his eyes directly. Also, I know about Vanessa. Don't insult me by denying it. His face went pale. Actually pale, like all the blood had drained out of it. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the hotels, the restaurants, the jewelry I never received. I'm talking about Vanessa's apartment that you've been visiting 3 nights a week for 2 months. I'm talking about the texts where you tell her I'm the obstacle between you and your happiness. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. How did you? Doesn't matter how I know. What matters is I know everything. And now you're going to have to deal with the consequences. I turned back to my laptop. Dismissed him like he was an interruption to my work instead of my husband of 7 years. He stood there for another moment, then turned and walked into his room. The door closed. The lock clicked. I sat on the couch, hands trembling slightly, and realized I'd just declared war. And I had no intention of losing. Joseph didn't come out of his room for the rest of that evening. I sat in the living room working on client projects, listening to the silence from behind his closed door and feeling strangely calm. The kind of calm that comes after you've finally stopped fighting against reality and started accepting it. Around 10 p.m. I heard his door open. Footsteps in the hallway. He appeared in the living room doorway, and I could tell from his face that he'd been working himself up to this conversation. We need to talk, he said. I didn't look up from my laptop. About what? About what you said earlier. About Vanessa. What about her? He came further into the room, ran a hand through his hair. You're jumping to conclusions. Making assumptions based on. I don't even know what you're basing this on. I saved my work, closed my laptop, and looked at him directly. I'm not jumping to conclusions, Joseph. I have proof. Proof of what? That I have a coworker I'm friendly with? That's not. I pulled out my phone, opened the screenshots folder, and held it up so he could see. His text to Vanessa. Can't wait for this weekend. Just you and me, no interruptions. His expression changed. The defensive anger crumbled into something else. Shock, fear, maybe the beginning of understanding that he'd been caught. Where did you get those? I scrolled to the next screenshot. She has no idea. And honestly, I don't care if she finds out anymore. Amanda, I can explain. Another screenshot. You're everything she's not. Beautiful, exciting, alive. I should have left her months ago. His face went pale. He reached for the phone like he could somehow make the evidence disappear if he just got his hands on it. I pulled it back. Doesn't matter how I got them, I said, voice steady. What matters is I know everything. The hotels. The restaurants. The $800 you spent at Tiffany's on jewelry I never received. The 2 months of lies. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again like a fish drowning in air. It's not, you don't understand the context. The context. I almost laughed. What context makes those messages okay, Joseph? What context makes spending our money on hotel rooms with another woman acceptable? I was confused, he said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. Work has been so stressful and you and I were having problems and Vanessa was just there when I needed someone. So this is my fault? I stood up. You cheated on me because I wasn't available enough? Because I wasn't whatever Vanessa is? No, that's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? He looked at me and I could see him trying to figure out which strategy would work. Denial had failed. Now he was pivoting to the victim approach. I made a mistake, he said quietly. I was struggling and I made a stupid mistake. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. Work through it. People survive affairs all the time. You told me I disgust you, I interrupted. 3 days ago you stood in our kitchen and told me you can't even stand looking at me. Those weren't the words of someone who made a mistake. Those were the words of someone who's been checked out for months and was just waiting for the right moment to make it official. I was angry. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. You meant every word. And honestly, I'm glad you finally said it. Because now I know exactly where I stand. He took a step toward me. Amanda, please. We've been together 7 years. That has to mean something. We can get past this. No, I said. We can't. Because I don't want to. The words hung in the air between us. I saw the moment they registered, the moment he understood that I wasn't going to fight for this marriage anymore. What are you saying? I'm saying it's over. You wanted out whether you were brave enough to admit it or not. So I'm giving you what you want. I never said I wanted out. You didn't have to. You said it with every late night. Every lie. Every text to Vanessa where you described how much better she is than me. You said it when you told me I disgust you. He was quiet for a moment. Then, so what, you're just going to throw away 7 years? I'm not throwing anything away. You already did that. I'm just dealing with it. Like you told me to. I picked up my laptop and walked past him toward the bedroom. He grabbed my arm, not hard but enough to stop me. Don't do this, he said. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. Let go of me. He did immediately, like he'd been burned. We're done, Joseph. Accept it. I went into the bedroom and closed the door. The next morning I called Patricia before Joseph was even awake. I want to file, I said when she answered. Are you sure? Completely. Then come in today. I'll have everything ready. I met her at her office at 10 a.m. Professional building downtown, 14th floor, corner office with windows overlooking the city. Everything about the space said success, competence, control. Patricia had the papers spread out on her conference table. Divorce petition. Asset division based on the infidelity clause. Custody arrangements. Not applicable, we didn't have kids. Timeline for vacating the shared residence. Walk me through it one more time, she said. Make sure you understand what you're signing. She explained each section. How the prenup protected my individual assets and his. How the infidelity clause meant he forfeited rights to anything we'd acquired jointly during the marriage. How I'd keep the apartment since my name was on the lease. How he'd take his car, his personal belongings, his individual bank accounts. You're walking away clean, Patricia said. No alimony paid or received. No splitting of joint assets. He gets what's his, you get what's yours. I sat there with the pen in my hand thinking about 7 years of marriage. The good years when we'd been happy. The slow decay when everything started falling apart. The cruelty of that Tuesday night in the kitchen. The betrayal documented in screenshots and credit card statements. You can still walk away from this, Patricia said quietly. You don't have to file if you're not ready. I thought about Joseph's face when he told me I disgusted him. Thought about Vanessa's apartment where he'd been spending nights that should have been hours. Thought about the Tiffany's receipt for jewelry I'd never seen. I signed the papers. Patricia nodded, gathered them efficiently. I'll arrange for him to be served at his office. Public. Professional. No room for him to make a scene. Thank you. This will get ugly, she warned. He'll fight it. They always do when money's involved. Let him fight. I have the evidence. Yes, you do. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in months. Like I'd been carrying something heavy and finally set it down. I was at a coffee shop 2 hours later, meeting with a client about a website redesign, when my phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Done. He's been served. My phone started ringing 30 seconds later. Joseph's name on the screen. I silenced it and turned back to my client. So we're thinking a clean, modern aesthetic, the client was saying. Nothing too cluttered. My phone buzzed again. Another call. I ignored it. Minimalist navigation, I said, pulling out my notebook. 3 main sections on the homepage. What are your priorities? By the time the meeting ended an hour later, Joseph had called 17 times. I scrolled through the voicemails later while walking back to my apartment. Amanda, what the hell? Call me back. I don't understand what's happening. We need to talk. This is insane. You can't just file for divorce without discussing it with me first. His voice progressed from confusion to anger to something close to desperation by the last message. Please. Just call me. We can fix this. I know we can. I deleted them all without responding. Instead, I sent one text. You said you couldn't stand looking at me. Now you don't have to. Then I turned off my phone and went home. I just walked in the door when someone started pounding on it from the outside. Loud, aggressive, impossible to ignore. Amanda. Open the door. I'd had the locks changed that afternoon. Called a locksmith right after my meeting with Patricia. My name was on the lease. I had every right. I opened the door but stood in the doorway blocking his entry. What do you want, Joseph? He looked genuinely shocked. Like he couldn't believe I'd actually gone through with it. What do I want? You filed for divorce without even talking to me. I almost laughed. You mean like how you started an affair without talking to me? That's different. How? How is that different? He tried to push past me into the apartment. I didn't move and he wasn't willing to physically force his way past. This is my apartment too, he said. Actually, it's not. Check the lease. Only my name. Has been since we moved in. You're welcome to collect your belongings with 24 hours notice. In writing. His face went red. You can't do this. I already did. I pulled out my phone and opened the screenshots again. Showed him the texts with Vanessa, the hotel receipts, the credit card charges showing dinners and gifts I'd never received. Your parents put an infidelity clause in our prenup, I said calmly. If either party can prove the other was unfaithful, the cheater walks away with only their individual assets. No joint property. No alimony. Nothing. I watched him process that information. Saw the moment he understood what he was about to lose. You walk away with what's yours, I continued. I walk away with what's mine. Sign the papers or drag this out in court. Your choice. He started crying then. Actual tears running down his face, the performance kind designed to manipulate. I love you, he said, voice breaking. I know I messed up, but I love you and we can fix this. I looked at him and felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just a cold, clear certainty that this was over. No, you don't, I said. You love the idea of not losing half your assets. But it's too late for that. I stepped back and closed the door. Locked it. Stood there listening to him pound on it for 5 more minutes before he finally left. And that's when I knew I'd won. The next morning, I woke up to 3 emails from an address I didn't recognize. The subject lines made it clear enough. Regarding Parker versus Parker divorce proceedings. Joseph had hired a lawyer. I forwarded them to Patricia without reading past the first paragraph and went to make coffee. My hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear. From adrenaline. From the understanding that this was really happening now. Patricia called me 20 minutes later. His lawyer is Richard Brennan, she said. I've dealt with him before. He's competent but predictable. And right now he's grasping at straws. What's he saying? That you obtained evidence illegally. That the prenup should be invalidated. That you abandoned the marriage emotionally before Joseph ever got involved with Vanessa. Standard deflection tactics when the evidence is against them. Can he actually argue those things? He can argue anything he wants. Doesn't mean a judge will listen. Everything you gathered came from joint accounts and shared devices. Completely legal. The prenup was signed with both parties having independent counsel, no duress, plenty of time to review. And emotional abandonment isn't grounds to invalidate an infidelity clause. She paused. He's just trying to save Joseph from the consequences of his own choices. So what do we do? Nothing. We respond calmly, provide documentation, and let Brennan exhaust himself. He knows he's going to lose. This is about delaying the inevitable and hoping you'll negotiate. I'm not negotiating. Good. Don't. Over the next week, the legal back and forth continued. Brennan filed a motion claiming the prenup was unconscionable. Patricia responded with the original documents showing both of us had legal representation and ample time to review before signing. Brennan tried to argue I'd emotionally neglected the marriage, creating circumstances that drove Joseph into someone else's arms. Patricia submitted the evidence of Joseph's affair. The texts, the hotel receipts, the timeline showing his relationship with Vanessa had started long before that Tuesday night confrontation. His lawyer is reaching, Patricia told me during one of our calls. This is what desperation looks like in legal terms. I should have felt vindicated. Maybe I did on some level. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired of the fighting. Tired of having my marriage dissected in legal language. Tired of Joseph still finding ways to make me the villain in his story. Then his mother called. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was working on a logo design for a new client when my phone rang with a number I didn't immediately recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello. How dare you? No introduction. Just 3 words dripping with venom. I recognized the voice immediately. Joseph's mother, Helen. How dare you do this to my son? I set down my stylus, leaned back in my chair. Hello, Helen. Don't you, hello, Helen me. Do you have any idea what you've done? He's devastated. Absolutely devastated. I stayed calm, which was harder than it sounds. Your son cheated on me for months. He made a mistake. One mistake. Marriage is about forgiveness, Amanda. It's about working through difficult times, not running away the second things get hard. I could hear Joseph in the background, his voice urgent but muffled. Mom, hang up. This isn't helping. Mom. Helen talked over him. You've always been cold. I told Joseph when he first brought you home that there was something off about you. Something selfish. But he loved you, God knows why, and I supported his choice even though I had my doubts. Is there a point to this call? I asked. The point is you're destroying my son over pride. Over your hurt feelings. You're taking everything from him because he made one mistake. He didn't make one mistake, I interrupted. He had an affair for months. He spent our money on hotel rooms and jewelry for another woman. He told me I disgusted him, that he couldn't stand looking at me. Those weren't mistakes. Those were choices. Because you let yourself go. Because you stopped being the woman he married. Her voice had risen to something close to a shout. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, took a breath, then brought it back. Helen, I'm going to send you something. After you look at it, you can call me back and apologize, or you can never call me again. Either way works for me. You arrogant. I hung up. Then I opened my phone and sent her everything. The screenshots of Joseph's texts to Vanessa. The credit card statements showing hotels and restaurants. The jewelry receipt. The location data. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered. She didn't call back. But Joseph did 2 hours later. My parents told me to sign the papers, he said when I answered. He sounded defeated. Hollow. Smart of them. My mom is upset. I don't care. She was just trying to help. By calling me cold and selfish? By saying I destroyed our marriage by letting myself go? That's helping. He was quiet for a moment. She sent me the things you sent her. The texts. Everything. Good. Then she knows the truth now. She says I need to sign and move on. That fighting this is just going to make it worse. Your mother is right. Another pause. I never wanted it to end like this. Then you shouldn't have cheated on me. I hung up before he could respond. Through all of it, the legal battles, the family drama, the constant barrage of emails and phone calls, Rebecca was the only person keeping me sane. She came over most evenings after work, usually with takeout because she knew I wasn't eating properly. We'd sit at my kitchen table and she'd let me vent or sit in silence depending on what I needed. One night, about 2 weeks into the legal process, I broke down completely. Not about Joseph specifically. About what the betrayal meant. What it said about me. I spent 7 years building a life with someone who decided I was disposable, I said through tears that surprised me with their intensity. 7 years loving someone, trying to make them happy, being a good wife. And it wasn't enough. I wasn't enough. What does that say about me? Rebecca grabbed my shoulders, made me look at her. It says you're human, she said firmly. It says you loved someone who didn't deserve it. That's not a character flaw, Amanda. That's just bad luck. But I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there. Stop. Stop doing that. Stop making this your fault. You're not responsible for his choices. You're not responsible for him being a coward who couldn't be honest about what he wanted. She sat back down, her expression softening. When Marcus left me, I did the same thing. Questioned everything about myself. Was I too demanding? Too independent? Not attractive enough? Not interesting enough? I drove myself crazy trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. What changed? I realized I was asking the wrong question. It wasn't, what did I do wrong? It was, why did I stay so long with someone who made me feel like I had to be someone else to be loved? She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're going to get through this. And on the other side, you're going to be better than you've ever been. I didn't believe her that night. But I wanted to. 3 weeks after I filed, we met at Patricia's office for the settlement conference. Joseph had finally agreed to sign. The conference room felt too big and too small at the same time. Too big for the 4 of us, me, Joseph, and our respective lawyers. Too small for all the hurt and anger and betrayal we'd brought into it. We sat across from each other at the long conference table. He looked terrible, like he hadn't been sleeping, like the weight of consequence was finally settling on his shoulders. Patricia and Brennan went over every detail with methodical precision. Asset division based on the infidelity clause. Who kept what? Timeline for Joseph moving his belongings out of the apartment. Division of the small amount we had in joint savings after I'd already moved my portion to my private account. Joseph kept looking at me like he was waiting for something. For me to break down. To change my mind. To say this was all a mistake and we could start over. I kept my face neutral. Signed where Patricia indicated. Didn't say a single word directly to him. When it was done, when all the papers were signed and witnessed and filed, we stood up. Patricia shook Brennan's hand with professional courtesy. Then we walked out, me and Joseph moving toward the elevators together out of pure muscle memory. The elevator came. We stepped inside. Rode down 14 floors in complete silence. When we reached the parking garage, he stopped by his car. I kept walking toward mine. Amanda. I stopped but didn't turn around. So that's it, he said. 7 years just gone? I turned then, looked at him standing there by his car and realized I was looking at a stranger. Someone who wore Joseph's face but wasn't the man I'd married. You're the one who threw them away, I said. I'm just cleaning up the mess. He opened his mouth like he was going to argue, going to try one more time to make me the villain in this story he'd been telling himself. I didn't give him the chance. I walked to my car, got in, started the engine and drove away. In my rearview mirror I could see him standing there in the parking garage, getting smaller and smaller until I turned the corner and he disappeared completely. I didn't look back again. I drove home from that parking garage feeling strange. Not happy exactly, but lighter. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to move without that weight. The divorce wouldn't be final for another 2 months. There were waiting periods, processing times, legal formalities that had to run their course. But the hard part was done. Joseph had signed. The settlement was agreed upon. Now it was just a matter of time. I spent those weeks in a kind of limbo. Working. Sleeping. Existing. Rebecca checked in every few days, but I told her I was fine. And I was mostly just numb in a way that felt safer than feeling anything else. Then I got a text from Marcus, Joseph's colleague, the one who'd always been friendlier to me at company events than most of his co-workers. We'd exchanged numbers once when I'd needed to reach Joseph during a work trip and his phone had died. Hey Amanda. Hope this isn't weird but thought you should know. Vanessa dumped Joseph. Happened about a week ago. He's not handling it well. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Thanks for telling me. She moved on to someone else at the office. One of the VPs. Joseph tried to convince her they could finally be together for real now, but apparently she wasn't interested in dealing with a divorced guy with baggage. I should have felt vindicated. Should have felt some satisfaction that the woman Joseph had destroyed our marriage for had tossed him aside the second he was actually available. That I just felt tired. He had a breakdown at work last week, Marcus continued. Started crying during a client presentation. Had to take personal leave. Just thought you'd want to know. Part of me, a small petty part I'm not particularly proud of, did feel vindicated. Joseph had thrown away 7 years for someone who didn't even want him once he was free. The poetic justice wasn't lost on me. But a larger part, one that surprised me, felt something close to pity. Not enough to change anything. Not enough to reach out or offer comfort. Just a dim recognition that he'd destroyed his own life chasing something that was never real. I thanked Marcus and put my phone away. Whatever Joseph was going through now, it wasn't my problem anymore. I threw myself into work with an intensity one hadn't felt in years. Took on 3 new clients in the span of 2 weeks. Started a personal project I'd been putting off forever. A series of illustrations about resilience, about rebuilding after things fall apart. Funny how betrayal can be creatively inspiring. My portfolio grew. I redesigned my website, updated my social media presence, started getting inquiries from bigger clients than I'd worked with before. One of them, a startup looking to rebrand, found me through a referral and liked my work enough to offer a retainer contract. Steady income. Real money. I was making more than I ever had, probably because I wasn't spending half my mental energy trying to save a dying marriage. The apartment became mine in ways it never had been before. I rearranged the furniture, moving the couch away from the wall where Joseph had always insisted it should go. Painted the walls a soft gray he'd always hated, said it was too depressing. Bought new art from a local gallery. Abstract pieces with bold colors that made me happy when I looked at them. The second bedroom, Joseph's former office-turned-bedroom, became my dedicated workspace. I bought a new desk, a better chair, put up shelves for my design books and supplies. Hung string lights around the window because they made the space feel cozy and creative. I worked late when I wanted. Ordered takeout without guilt about the expense or judgment about the choice. Watched whatever I wanted on TV without someone sighing heavily from across the room because I'd chosen wrong. The silence that had felt suffocating during the marriage, that heavy, judgmental quiet, now felt peaceful. I was alone. But I wasn't lonely. There's a difference. 6 weeks after the divorce finalized, I got a message on social media from someone I hadn't thought about in years. Daniel Hammond. A guy I'd dated briefly before Joseph, back when I was 26 and still figuring out what I wanted. We'd parted on good terms, stayed loosely friendly in that way people do when they follow each other online but rarely interact. Hey Amanda. Heard about your divorce through the grapevine. Just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. If you need someone to talk to, coffee's on me. I almost didn't respond. Dating was the last thing on my mind and I didn't want him to get the wrong idea. But something about the message felt genuine. Non-threatening. Just one human being reaching out to another who might be having a rough time. Coffee sounds nice, I wrote back. But just coffee. Not ready for anything else. Completely understood. Saturday at 2. We met at a place halfway between our neighborhoods. I got there first, ordered a latte and sat by the window watching people walk past on the street. Daniel showed up 5 minutes later looking mostly the same, a little older, a little more tired around the eyes, but still the easygoing guy I remembered. Hey, he said, sliding into the chair across from me. Thanks for agreeing to meet. Thanks for reaching out. We talked for 2 hours. About the divorce but not obsessively. About his life. He'd gotten divorced himself 3 years ago. Understood what I was going through in ways most people didn't. About work, about mutual friends, about everything and nothing. He told me I seemed different than he remembered. Different how? Stronger. More like yourself. He paused, choosing his words carefully. When you were with Joseph, it always felt like you were performing. Like you were trying to be whoever he needed you to be. Now you just seem present. Joseph dimmed your light, he added. It's good to see you bright again. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. We talked about his own failed marriage. His ex-wife had left him for someone she'd met at work, ironically similar to my situation. He'd spent a year angry, another year depressed, and was only now starting to feel like himself again. Everyone carries damage, he said. Everyone has chapters they'd rather forget. The trick is not letting those chapters define your whole story. I thought about that a lot after we parted ways. About whether I was going to let Joseph's betrayal be the last word on who I was, or whether I was going to write new chapters that mattered more. I was leaning toward the latter. But Joseph wasn't done trying to rewrite the ending. He started texting me again about a month after the divorce finalized. Messages that started apologetic and progressively got more desperate. I miss you. I made a terrible mistake. Can we just talk? Please. I didn't respond to any of them. Then he started showing up places. Outside my apartment building one morning when I was leaving for a coffee run. At the coffee shop I frequented, sitting at a table in the corner like he'd been waiting. Amanda, please. Just 5 minutes. No. I need to explain. There's nothing to explain. We're done. Move on. He showed up at Rebecca's apartment one evening, knocked on her door looking for me. She called me immediately. Your ex is here. Want me to call the cops or just tell him to leave? Tell him to leave. If he doesn't, call the cops. She must have been convincing because he left. But the pattern continued. Random encounters that stopped being coincidental after the third or fourth time. Him showing up places he had no reason to be, places I regularly went. I called Patricia. I need a restraining order. Has he threatened you? No. But he won't leave me alone. He's showing up everywhere I go. I need legal protection. File a report. Document every incident with dates and times. Then we'll petition for a temporary restraining order. I did. Listed every text, every appearance, every time he'd tried to contact me after I'd made it clear I wanted no communication. The hearing was quick. The judge looked over the evidence, asked Joseph if he disputed any of it. He didn't, just tried to explain that he was trying to apologize, that he deserved a chance to make things right. The judge wasn't impressed. Mr. Parker, your ex-wife has made it clear she doesn't want contact with you. You need to respect that. I'm granting a temporary restraining order. You're to stay at least 100 yards away from Ms. Parker, her residence, and her place of work. No contact of any kind. No calls, texts, emails, or third-party communication. Violation will result in immediate legal consequences. Do you understand? Joseph's face crumpled. Yes, Your Honor. I walked out of that courthouse feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Safe. Rebecca asked me that night if I felt guilty about it. About getting a legal order to keep my ex-husband away from me. No, I said. And I meant it. I'd spent 7 years accommodating Joseph's needs. Excusing his behavior. Making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. Apologizing for things that weren't my fault. Letting him make me feel like I was the problem. I was done shrinking for men who couldn't handle women at full size. The restraining order worked. Joseph stopped trying to contact me. Stopped showing up places. And slowly, day by day, I started feeling like myself again. Not the self I'd been before Joseph. Someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who'd survived betrayal and came out on the other side knowing exactly what she wouldn't accept anymore. The restraining order created space. Real space, not the toxic kind Joseph and I had developed during our marriage. The kind where I could breathe without wondering when he'd show up next. Where I could move through my days without constantly looking over my shoulder. But space alone doesn't heal wounds. It just gives them room to exist without getting worse. 4 months after the divorce finalized, Rebecca showed up at my apartment with coffee and a determined expression I recognized immediately. You're going to therapy, she announced, setting the coffee in front of me. I'm fine. You're functioning. That's not the same as fine. Rebecca. I already made you an appointment. Dr. Sarachin. Thursday at 3. She's who I saw after Marcus left. She's good. I wanted to argue. Wanted to insist I'd handled everything so well. Filed for divorce, gathered evidence, protected myself financially, got the restraining order. I'd been rational. Competent. But Rebecca knew me too well. Rational doesn't mean healed, she said quietly. And you deserve to heal, not just survive. So Thursday at 3 I found myself in Dr. Chen's office. Comfortable chairs. Soft lighting. A box of tissues on the side table that felt like a challenge. Dr. Chin was in her 50s, with kind eyes and an expression that suggested she'd heard everything and wouldn't be shocked by anything I said. "How are you doing?" she asked after the initial pleasantries. "Fine," I said automatically. She just looked at me. Didn't contradict. Didn't push. Just waited in silence that stretched longer and longer until I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm angry," I admitted finally. "But not at Joseph. At myself." "Tell me about that." "I wasted 7 years. 7 years with someone who decided I was disposable. And I didn't see it coming, or I did see it and ignored it, or I saw it and convinced myself I could fix it. Either way, I failed." "Failed at what?" "At making him love me. At being enough. My voice cracked. At not being the kind of person who gets cheated on." Dr. Chin leaned forward slightly. "If a friend told you that story, that they'd loved someone who betrayed them, what would you say?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. I'd tell them it wasn't their fault. That they weren't responsible for someone else's choices. That loving someone doesn't make you stupid. Then say it to yourself. Those 5 words broke something open in me. I started crying, not the pretty, delicate kind, but the ugly, gut-wrenching kind that feels like it's being pulled from somewhere deep. "I'm so angry at myself for staying," I said through tears. "For making excuses. For believing I was the problem." "You believed what he told you. That's not a character flaw. That's being human." Over the next months, Dr. Chin and I worked through everything. Not just the marriage and betrayal, but the patterns that had led me there. How I'd confused self-sacrifice with love. How I'd made myself responsible for Joseph's happiness while neglecting my own. How I'd shrunk myself to make room for someone who didn't appreciate the space I was giving him. "Healing doesn't mean forgiving him," Dr. Chin said during one session. "It means forgiving yourself." That concept took time to accept. But slowly I started to. Around the same time I started therapy, I also started yoga. Not because I thought I needed to lose weight or improve my appearance. Joseph's cruel words about letting myself go still stung, but I was working through that in therapy. I started because I needed to feel strong in my own body again. The studio was 3 blocks from my apartment. The instructor, Maria, taught a class called Power and Resilience that met 3 times a week. I was terrible at first. Couldn't hold the poses. Couldn't quiet my mind enough to focus. Spent half the class frustrated with my own limitations and the other half comparing myself to the flexible, graceful people around me. But Maria had a way of making everyone feel like they were exactly where they needed to be. "Yoga isn't about being perfect," she'd say during class. "It's about showing up. About breathing through the hard parts. About being present in your body." Slowly things shifted. I got stronger. Could hold plank for 30 seconds, then a minute. Started sleeping better than I had in years. The constant anxiety that had been my companion through the marriage and divorce started loosening its grip. One Saturday afternoon after class, I stopped at the animal shelter 2 streets over. I'd been thinking about getting a cat for weeks but had been hesitant. Felt like I was barely holding my own life together. How could I be responsible for another living thing? But that afternoon I walked in and saw her. A gray tabby about 3 years old, sitting in the back corner of her cage looking supremely unimpressed with the world. "That's Pepper," the volunteer said. "She was surrendered last month. Owner said they didn't have time for her anymore." I looked at Pepper. She looked at me. 2 refugees from people who'd decided we weren't worth the effort. "I'll take her." Pepper came home with me that day. We built a routine. Morning coffee while she sat in the window watching birds and judging the world. Evening work sessions with her curled on my desk, purring while I designed logos and websites. She didn't care what I looked like. Didn't care about my success or failure. Just wanted food, warmth, and occasional attention. Simple needs. Honest needs. I could meet those. 8 months after my divorce finalized, Rebecca called me with news that made me genuinely happy for the first time in what felt like forever. "I'm engaged." "What?" "Tell me everything." She and Marcus had been dating for 2 years. He was everything Joseph hadn't been. Present, kind, someone who showed up when he said he would and didn't make Rebecca feel crazy for expecting basic respect. "I want you to be my maid of honor," she said. I hesitated. Weddings felt like salt in still healing wounds. "I know it might be hard," Rebecca continued, "but this isn't about your failed marriage. It's about celebrating mine. And I want my sister there." He was right. I threw myself into the role. Planned her bachelorette party. Nothing wild, just a weekend at a spa with her closest friends. Helped her pick a dress. Held her hand when she got nervous about commitment, about whether she was making the right choice. Marcus isn't Joseph, I reminded her. You're not me. Your marriage will be yours, not a repeat of mine. The wedding day was beautiful. Simple ceremony in a garden, reception in a small restaurant. I stood beside Rebecca as her maid of honor and watched her marry someone who looked at her like she'd hung the moon. During the vows I cried. Not from sadness about my own failed marriage but from hope. Love hadn't worked for me and Joseph. But it was working for Rebecca and Marcus. That meant it was still possible. Maybe not now. Maybe not for a while. But possible. A year after the divorce, I'm not the same person who stood in that kitchen and heard her husband say he couldn't stand looking at her. I'm someone different. Someone better. My design business has grown beyond anything I'd imagined during my marriage. I hired a part-time assistant, Emma, a recent design school graduate who reminds me of myself at that age. I'm mentoring 3 younger designers through a program at the local arts center. I moved to a 1-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood. Smaller than the place I shared with Joseph but entirely mine. The walls are covered in my own artwork. Pieces I've created over the past year. The furniture is exactly what I want. No compromise. No negotiation. No accommodating someone else's preferences. Sometimes people ask what happened to my marriage. I keep it simple. We grew apart. The people who matter know the whole truth. The ones who don't aren't owed an explanation. I've been on a few dates. Daniel and I got coffee a few more times before mutually agreeing we were better as friends. There was someone from yoga class who asked me out. We went to dinner twice before I realized I wasn't ready for anything serious. He understood. Mostly I'm learning to be happy alone. To find completeness in myself instead of searching for it in someone else. To build a life that's mine on my terms without needing someone else's validation to make it feel real. Joseph destroyed our marriage. But he didn't destroy me. If anything, he accidentally gave me freedom I didn't know I needed. Freedom from trying to be enough for someone who would never see me as enough. Freedom from shrinking myself to make room for someone else's ego. Freedom to just be myself completely and unapologetically. I'm 35 now. Single. Stronger than I've ever been. Building a life entirely on my own terms. And honestly, I've never been happier. Some mornings I wake up in my apartment. My space, my rules, my peace, and feel genuinely grateful. Not grateful for the betrayal or the pain. But grateful for what came after. For who I became when I stopped trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved and started saving myself instead. Joseph made his choice when he decided I was disposable. I made mine when I decided I wasn't. And in the end I walked away with something he'll never have. The knowledge that I can survive the worst someone can do to me and come out stronger on the other side. That's worth more than any marriage that required me to be less than I am. If this story of cold calculation and quiet revenge had you gripping your screen, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Amanda confronted Joseph with all the evidence and watched his face go pale. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more jaw-dropping stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.